Let's really dive in here. Today, we're getting this incredibly rare and personal look into Elvis Presley's life right at the start of his huge fame.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because you get to hear directly from someone who was actually there, sharing a big part of his life just as he was becoming, Elvis.
Exactly. We're talking about Anita Wood, his former girlfriend. Our whole deep dive today is centered around excerpts from an interview with her, which you can find on the EP Fan Archive YouTube channel.
And it's her voice, her memories, not secondhand stuff. That's what makes it so compelling. It gives it this real texture.
Absolutely. And the timing is key, right? This is the late 1950s. He'd just done Loving You.
So he's right on the cusp of becoming this, well, global phenomenon.
And Anita, she wasn't unknown either, not in Memphis anyway. She was on a popular local TV dance show. So you have these two local figures.
Whose worlds are about to collide in a massive way. It's interesting, too, because this period is before the kind of later Elvis image really solidified. He's still a young guy dealing with this explosion of fame.
Right. So that's our mission today. Let's really dig into what Anita remembers. What was it really like being with Elvis then? What does her story tell us about him, his personality, and, I guess, the pressures they faced?
Okay, so where does it start? The first meeting.
Yeah, how did they actually connect?
Well, according to Anita, it's got this sort of classic Memphis vibe. He saw her on her TV show, the Saturday afternoon dance show.
Okay.
And then after one show, he actually had Lamar Fike, one of his guys, call her up.
Wow, just out of the blue like that. Imagine getting that call.
Right. And her first impression of Elvis, she says quite clearly, he was the most stunningly good-looking man she had ever laid eyes on.
Yeah.
Period.
That's quite a statement. And she remembers what he wore.
Yeah, just like a shirt, black trousers, maybe one of his motorcycle caps. Casual, but, it's still Elvis.
Yeah, that guy. Even in casual clothes. It's interesting, isn't it? That sort of everyday look compared to the jumpsuits later.
Definitely. Maybe that relatability was part of the initial appeal, even as things were getting huge.
So the first date, the famous Cadillac.
The long Cadillac he's driving. And she mentions this initial formality, sitting way over on the other side of the bench seat.
Huh. And that little detail about the car door being slightly open.
Yeah. It's funny. A small thing, but maybe it shows a bit of his playful side, kind of breaking the ice. Or maybe the door just didn't shut right.
Who knows? So pretty soon she's spending time at Graceland.
Which was already becoming, Graceland, the hub.
And they're doing normal young couple things. Watching TV, listening to music.
Sort of. But then you get the fans showing up.
Yeah.
And this is where it gets unusual.
Right. He just let them in.
Apparently. Invite fans who are hanging out at the gates right into the house. Imagine that on your date.
Oh, man. That must have been awkward.
Well, he definitely describes it that way. She talks about these girls just swarming him, even sitting on his lap.
While she's there as his date. Yikes.
Exactly. You can just feel the discomfort in her telling of it.
Yeah.
And, that leads straight into the whole secrecy thing around their relationship, doesn't it?
Yeah, that seemed to be a big part of it.
A huge part. Anita puts that down to Colonel Tom Parker, his manager. The colonel apparently didn't want Elvis tied down publicly.
Keep the fantasy alive for the fans, that kind of thing.
Precisely. Maintain the image of the available heartthrob. It was all very calculated.
So Anita had to, pretend she wasn't that serious about him in public?
Yeah, she mentions trying not to look too happy in photos with him. Can you imagine? Trying to actively downplay your own relationship.
That's a really strange position to be in. Crazy pressure.
It really shows you the power the management had and the collision between his private life and this massive public persona he had to maintain.
And Elvis. How did he handle that with her?
Well, she says in private, he'd reassure her, tell her she was the only one, that all the secrecy was just publicity stuff.
And she believed him.
She says he had a way about him, that he could make her feel like their connection was real and special, despite everything else swirling around.
But life with him, even just hanging out at Graceland, wasn't exactly normal, was it?
Not remotely. I mean, she talks about these Roman candle fights they'd have in the backyard.
Roman candle fights? Seriously?
Yeah, with him and his friends. She describes it as pretty wild, even kind of scary. It gives you a glimpse of maybe a more impulsive, energetic side.
Definitely not the polished performer image. And the motorcycle rides.
Right, just jumping on bikes and tearing through Memphis, spur of the moment. It sounds like he was still grabbing at moments of freedom,
Trying to stay grounded, maybe? Escaping the craziness for a bit?
Could be. It seems those moments were important. And they traveled too, didn't they? New Orleans, California?
Yeah, she mentions being invited down for the filming of King Creole in New Orleans.
And trips out to L.A., staying at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, which sounds glamorous, but
They didn't really love Hollywood.
apparently not. Anita called it the wildest place, and it seems they both felt a bit out of sync with it, like they preferred their Memphis roots.
Interesting. And Ricky Nelson visited them out there.
Yeah, another little snapshot of that, these rising stars crossing paths.
But ultimately, she felt Elvis was happiest back in Memphis.
That's what she says. With his family, his close friends, that seemed to be his anchor.
Which brings us to 1957. She flags that as a really big year.
Oh, absolutely pivotal. Professionally, it was huge. All Shook Up, hit #1.
Yeah.
Jailhouse Rock, premiered in Memphis.
Right.
Massive success.
But something else happened that year. Something major on a personal level.
The draft notice. Getting drafted into the Army.
Right. I mean, imagine getting that news when you're arguably the biggest star on the planet.
Exactly. And Anita talks about his mother, Gladys. Her reaction, she says Gladys was just devastated, scared, sad, utterly heartbroken.
Wow. That really shows how close they were and the sheer shockwaves the draft sent through their lives.
It really grounds the story, doesn't it? It wasn't all glamour. Real life, major life events were happening right alongside the superstardom.
And even with all that turmoil, they still found places to escape, like that house in Waco, Texas, Eddie Fadal's place.
Yes, that seemed like a genuine sanctuary for him. Anita describes the Fadals as incredibly welcoming. They even had a room just for Elvis. It was somewhere he could just be.
Let his guard down.
Exactly. Get away from it all. And she shares this really sweet memory from there.
The dancing?
Yeah. A birthday, maybe hers, she thinks, possibly May. And Elvis, who apparently didn't like dancing much.
He danced with her.
He did, while singing Happy Birthday, Baby. It's just such a lovely, humanizing little moment, isn't it?
Yeah.
Good food, warm atmosphere. You can see why it stood out to her.
Those moments away from the spotlight, they feel so important in her story.
They really do. It suggests this real need for normalcy, for connection outside the bubble of fame.
But, well, things didn't stay peaceful. There was a big shift, a discovery she made in California.
This is where the story takes a sharp turn. She's visiting him, I think at his hotel, and she finds a letter.
Not just any letter.
No. It was tucked in a book, somewhere near his bedroom, and it was from Priscilla Bewley.
And the letter itself was pretty direct.
Very. Asking Elvis to call her father so she could come visit him, saying how much she missed him, wanted to be with him. It definitely implied something serious was going on.
Something Anita clearly wasn't aware of.
Right. And finding it led to a pretty intense confrontation.
He got angry.
Very angry, according to Anita. She says he even physically pushed her against a closet. It shows this flash of temper, his defensiveness about it all.
That's rough. And then she overheard something.
Yeah, adding insult to injury, really. She heard Elvis saying he was having trouble choosing between two people.
Oh, wow. That must have been the final straw.
It seems like it was. Hearing that confirmation of his indecision right after finding the letter, she decided to leave.
And it was emotional.
Very. She describes them both crying. It wasn't a clean break, you know. It speaks to the fact that there were real feelings there even as it was all falling apart.
And he said something conflicted as she left.
Yeah, something like he prayed to God he was doing the right thing, letting her go. Which suggests he wasn't entirely sure himself. A lot of internal struggle there, it seems.
And their final conversation, it sounds like it was pretty raw.
Extremely raw. They kind of got into it about, seeing other people. All the insecurities and frustrations just came tumbling out.
She wanted honesty.
Yeah, she seemed to be pushing for clarity, for honesty. And he got defensive, apparently accused her of nagging him.
So the core issue was trust and different ideas about commitment while dating.
It really sounds like it. Their perspectives on whether you could date others while supposedly being in a serious relationship just didn't line up. Plus, the unbelievable pressure cooker environment they were in.
It just amplified everything. Miscommunication, temptation.
Yeah, absolutely. It highlights how incredibly difficult it must have been to navigate any relationship under that kind of intense, constant scrutiny.
So when we wrap up this deep dive into Anita Wood's perspective, what are the big takeaways for you? What really stands out?
Well, you definitely get this picture of Elvis's charm, his charisma. You see why people were drawn to him, but you also really feel the weight of that early fame.
The pressure.
The immense pressure, and how it led to secrecy, how it complicated everything personal. Her stories, they give you these little windows into his actual life. Graceland, the trips, the friend.
The Roman candle fights.
Right. the ordinary moments and the completely extraordinary ones.
Hmm.
And underneath it all, you sense the emotional complexity, the vulnerabilities of this guy becoming an icon.
It definitely leaves you thinking, like, what does Anita's experience really tell us about trying to have a private life when you're that famous, especially back then in the 50s?
Before social media, but still under this intense spotlight.
Or maybe how does hearing this very personal account change how we think about Elvis Presley, the legend? Does it add new layers?
That's a great question. And really, it's something for you, the listener, to mull over. Her story is powerful, but it's one perspective, of course.
True, there are always other viewpoints.
Exactly. So if this sparked your interest, maybe look into other accounts from people who knew him then. Building that fuller picture, there's always more to explore.